Lieutenant Ilya Juno had always considered herself a quiet anomaly in Earth's off-world diplomacy corps. She was too sharp-tongued for field teams, too observant for clerical duties, and just competent enough to be tolerated by the brass. That might explain why, when Earth refused to sign the Galactic Concord's compliance treaty, she was volunteered as a gesture of goodwill to the Concord flagship Orolith, which, in military speak, meant hostage. She wasn't given a choice. One moment she was decoding its soul morning chant in a lunar-based conference room, and the next she was in a pressure-sealed chamber aboard the largest diplomatic warship in known space, with insectoid guards clicking at her like fascinated lab techs. The HFY, her assigned custodians, made no effort to disguise their clinical obsession. They observed her constantly from the moment she woke to the moment she slept, documenting her routines, speech patterns, dietary needs, and even waste output with scientific reverence. At first, she tried to play nice. "Good morning. No, I don't secrete pheromones intentionally. That's just deodorant. Yes, I do a bone underneath the skin. No, you can't touch it. Is this really what counts as cultural exchange for you people?" But sarcasm wasn't part of their linguistic matrix. The HFY's reaction to humor was blank stillness, followed by a flurry of vocal clicks. Not confusion, but intense data recording. She was being filed like an unknown insect in a terrarium. After a week, she stopped trying to explain herself. They fed her food cubes, let her exercise under observation, and subjected her to routine scans in what passed for diplomacy labs. Occasionally, she was paraded before Concord scientists, gelatinous cephalites, haughty avian zor, and brutal Krex commanders with shoulders like walls and eyes like smoldering iron. To the Krex, she was invisible. No claws, no armor, no threat. One even scoffed aloud. "Is this the predator species your world sends to negotiate war? It has no scent of blood." She looked up from her protein slurry and smiled sweetly. "Well, I'm not in uniform. You don't see your own generals naked and covered in barbecue sauce. Do you?" The translator paused, then malfunctioned. One Krex guard twitched as if unsure whether to laugh or lunge. But the moment passed. She was filed again, unstable, unpredictable, no threat classification. The Orolith itself was a marvel, an orbiting city of logic and tradition, a place where every species on the Concord Council had carved their mark. There were scent gardens for the Krex, sonic meditation chambers for the Zor, atmospheric jelly corridors for cephalites, and sterile observation decks for the HFY. Humans had no designated habitat. Ilya's cell was politely labeled a neutral interface pod. It looked like a hospital bed jammed into a sterile box. The only personal addition she was permitted was a tattered paperback, Dante's Inferno, which the HFY promptly scanned, copied, and tried to decode. They assumed it was a war manual. She encouraged the idea. On the 18th day of her captivity, the ship's ambient hum changed. The HFY stopped studying her that morning. They stopped everything. For a species that operated on unbroken routine, it was chilling. From a reinforced viewing port, Ilya watched as escort ships shifted into new formations. Biological filtration systems were rerouted. Exterior pylons released clouds of crystalline dust, camouflage protocols. Then came the alert chimes. At first, she assumed it was another exercise, until the Krex arrived, not to mock her, but to guard her. Two massive warriors stationed themselves outside her door. Their black armored forms stood perfectly still, but their eyes flicked constantly, narrowed, predatory. Something had changed. She waited and waited until finally, at 0300 ship time, a panel on her wall flickered and hissed open. A slender cephalite diplomat slithered in. Its jelly flesh shimmered, eyes blinking in syncopated rhythm. "Human Ilya Juno, you are requested at a classified council session. Your species' unpredictability is now considered potentially relevant." "Oh," she replied dryly. "Is this the part where I get a name tag and stop being specimen?" "This is the part," the cephalite said, "where your chaos might be the only pattern left unmodeled by the Vex." She was escorted through 6 security checkpoints to the Taurus chamber, the command nucleus of Orolith, a hollow sphere floating in grav null containment. The Taurus rotated slowly in vacuum light, with each section dedicated to a Concord species. Her human presence stood out like spilled ink on pristine parchment. The chamber was tense. Krex warlords shifted uneasily in their exosuits. Zor tacticians chirped with quiet alarm. The cephalites refracted stress through oscillating color bands. Even the Heshtar showed signs of neural flutter, an unprecedented display of fear. A projection flickered on. The Vex, a swirling mass of adaptive machinery, half organic, half data stream. The footage showed a Vex infiltrator slicing through a battlecruiser, weapons reconfigured in real time. Organic crew were infected, rewritten, repurposed. Their brains melted into command nodes. It wasn't war. It was assimilation through comprehension. They do not conquer, said the Concord Supreme Mediator. They incorporate. Every strike teaches them. Every tactic becomes theirs. We estimate full Concord collapse in 33 days if escalation continues. And Earth? Ilya asked. The chamber paused. Your world is resistant, non-standard. You fight asymmetrically. You do not share neural command hierarchies. Your troops disobey orders. Your culture elevates improvisation. The Vex cannot predict you. Ilya leaned forward. So you want a human variable. You want chaos. Correct, the mediator said flatly. Then unchain me. I need a terminal, data access, and one of your most unstable Krex. Preferably one that smells like old socks and has a grudge against gravity. There was silence, then laughter. From a Krex, a low, rumbling sound like a boulder cracking open. Give her the beast, the warlord growled. Let her prove what these soft bodies are good for. Back in her cell, now relabeled Command Environment 7H, Ilya was finally alone with access to the Concord's war archive. She studied every known engagement with the Vex, every retreat, every lost ship. She memorized their pattern learning cycles and the rhythms of their nanite resets. Then she began planning, not for victory, but for interruption. She created variables, traps, noise. Her first strategy was dubbed Operation Fork in the microwave. Her second, Dead Rat in the server room. By the time the Vex arrived at Orletha's doorstep, Ilya Juno wasn't just Earth's hostage. She was the galaxy's most dangerous improviser. The Vex did not announce their arrival. They arrived as flickers in the sky, shifts in the gravity well around Orleth. Static crept into the ship's neural relays. Entropy increased in mechanical systems. Automated lights dimmed without cause. For a species that built itself from harvested blueprints, arrival was less an invasion and more reality adjustment. By the time the Concord's forward sensors confirmed their presence, the Vex had already mapped the ship's defenses and begun testing weaknesses. A medical bay dissolved into biomechanical residue. 3 dozen minds rewritten in seconds. Security cameras caught brief glimpses, glistening figures of shifting armor and glimmering spines, walking through sealed walls as if permission was a suggestion. Ilya Juno was waiting. Her lab-turned command module had been outfitted with proximity mines and microwave emitters reprogrammed to confuse Vex sensory patterns. She had memorized 3 dozen escape paths, each designed to split the Vex attention and reroute them through chaos loops. But she stayed still. At the center, she needed their attention. Commander Trask of the Krex, the one she'd requested, stood beside her now, arms folded, pupils slit and unblinking. You believe you're bait. I'm the loudest thing in the trap. Traska's voice rumbled like tectonic plates. You lack claws, fangs. Your species fights like cornered rodents. She grinned. That's why it works. You expect us to lose. And then we show you what losing looks like with a crowbar and a homemade circuit override. Trask looked at her oddly, as if she were either genius or poison. Explain this plan again. Ilya activated a display. The Vex were not infinite. They recycled patterns. Everything they learned became an exploitable rhythm. Her trap used their own process against them. The Vex relied on environmental cohesion, predictable terrain, repeatable conditions. But human unpredictability introduced noise into the system. Her plan: destabilize the Vex learning rate by feeding them false data. Every hallway near the command pod had been restructured. Gravity fluctuated. Scent markers looped. Dead corridors mimicked escape tunnels. She had even placed dummy corpses of herself in several compartments, each rigged with molecular destabilizers. "They won't know which version of me is the real one," she said. "And when they guess wrong, we spike their processors with chaos algorithms. And if they guess right," Trask asked. She smiled. "Then I detonate." He tilted his head. "You are unworthy of honor, but you are worthy of fear." Then the door pulsed. Not opened, not breached. It pulsed. Once, like a heartbeat. Trask raised his weapon. Ilya picked up a sonic relay. The door throbbed again. Wet. Wrong. Then it bled. A line split across its center, and thick strands of black ichor oozed from the seams. The metal rippled. Two eyes, silver, expressionless, formed like blisters in steel. The Vex had arrived, and were watching. "Don't move," she whispered. The door blinked. A voice, fractured and multi-layered, spoke through vibrating bulkheads. "Pattern located." "Now," Ilya said, snapping the relay online. A blinding strobe lit the hallway. Audio distorters shrieked in conflicting waveforms. Gravity spiked to 9G, then inverted. The Vex I twisted into static. The hallway melted. Trask lunged through the chaos, dragging Ilya into a secondary tunnel. Sirens wailed behind them. Biological material slithered down the walls, converted alloy blooming into nerve-structured fiber. A Vex drone emerged from the ruin. It was 8 feet tall, jointed like a mantis, armor like obsidian, and pulsed with visible thought, a lattice of data streams flowing across its body like heat lightning. It moved without sound, until it shrieked, not from rage, from recognition. Unpredictable node, data conflict, priority acquisition. It moved toward Ilya. She pulled a small disc from her wristband and flung it at the creature's chest. The disc detonated in a burst of electromagnetic noise, not enough to kill, but enough to disorient. Trask tackled it mid-lunge. Kreck's claws met Vex steel. Sparks flew. The thing convulsed, flexed, shifted its limbs mid-strike, an elbow becoming a blade, a knee transforming into a whip. Trask roared as he was cut across the face. Ilya sprinted for a console. "Trask, pull it left." He slammed into the drone's midsection, forcing it into the trap she'd rigged an hour earlier, a gravitic funnel that reversed spatial inertia. As the Vex tumbled in, the funnel activated and compressed. In half a second, the drone shrunk into itself and folded like a crushed insect. The remains twitched once, then stilled. The corridor smelled like static and ozone. Trask sat heavily against the wall, blood dripping down one eye. "I underestimated you. Human." Ilya leaned against a pipe, panting. "Get in line." "So, did my math teacher." A warning flare lit her wristband. New breach. Deck 7. Worse. The central neural archive was no longer responding. They moved fast. The warship's map rotated in Ilya's head like a mental maze. She'd memorized the corridors, anticipated this, but not the next thing. As they reached the central node, where the ship's council usually met in orbiting grav chairs, they found it silent, empty. No guards, no sound, except one, a whisper, repeating, "Adapt or die, adapt or die, adapt." It came from a Concord diplomat, or what used to be one. Her body was half dissolved, veins glowing with biocode, eyes filled with data spirals. She stood among 6 others, fused together into a shared mass of shifting limbs and shared thought. A Vex speaker organ. "Oh no," Ilya murmured. "They're turning the ship into a node." Trask growled. The Vex were building a command repeater from infected minds, using Concord's own council as a relay. If they succeeded, they'd integrate the entire ship into their hive, and then transmit Earth's behavioral data to the Vex mainframe. Everything humanity had done to confuse them, everything she devised, would be learned, obsolete. Ilya made a choice. She turned to Trask and handed him a chip. "Go to engineering. Input this code into the stabilizer relay. That will collapse the internal field." "Exactly. It'll force a ship-wide system reset. Neural and environmental. It will kill you. Only if I don't upload a false memory spike first. Trask narrowed his eyes. Explain. She smiled faintly. The Vex aren't just using our minds. They're reading them. I'll feed them a fake war protocol. Something they'll eat up like candy. While they chew, you fry the circuits. Hard. This is suicide. No, it's adaptation. Trask said nothing. Then, without another word, he sprinted. Ilya entered the council chamber alone. The fused Vex diplomats turned toward her. Pattern node, human threat, unsampled potential. Their limbs open in a strange, reverent gesture. A tendril emerged. Submit for analysis. Ilya lifted her wristband. Okay, but you won't like what you taste. The data pulse fired. A looping sequence of false Earth memories, created by Ilya over the last 6 months, built entirely from fictional strategy games, theater scripts, and a romantic comedy she hated in college. It uploaded. The Vex paused. They reeled. They began to recite false orders to themselves. Deploy Spoon Regiment to orbit of Chicago. Initiate protocol. Space divorce clause. Red, wedding alpha confirmed. They staggered. Then they shrieked. Just as Trask activated the relay, the ship's spine jolted. Lights reversed polarity. Magnetic walls slammed shut. Neural data flushed like sewage. The Vex construct imploded, mind first. Ilya collapsed to her knees, bleeding from her nose, but smiling. When the Concord Council reconvened, she was sitting in a chair. Trask stood behind her. A new term was entered into the Concord database. Not diplomat, not soldier, but predator class, human. For 3 days, silence ruled Orlith, the kind of silence that follows trauma, not from peace, but from paralysis. Thousands had died. The Vex infiltrator nest had been purged, but not without consequence. Half the council chamber had to be resealed. The ship's central memory core had been burned and rebuilt from backups. Concord forces were still scraping Vex residue from organic systems. And in the heart of it all sat Lieutenant Ilya Juno, bruised, bandaged, and wearing the plain slate-gray robes of a Concord observer. No longer a hostage. Not yet an ally. She wasn't sure what she was anymore. A title had been whispered across the bridge decks and engineering wings. Predator class. It was meant as reverence. Fear, even. But to Ilya, it felt like a cage made of barbed wire. She didn't want to be anyone's weapon. She wanted to survive. Counselor Erix, the cephalite envoy who'd once scanned her toenails for data, approached without fanfare. His gelatinous form flowed into the debriefing chamber, like a titapool slipping into an airlock. Lieutenant Juno, it said, each syllable radiating across the walls. We are ready to hear your plan. Plan? She asked, sipping rehydrated coffee from a metal bulb. You have been elevated to contingency tier. Contingency tier sounds like a polite way to say last hope. It is not a compliment. It is a necessity. Ilya sighed and stood, bones aching. She had slept 4 hours in 3 days. Her wristband still glitched from neural overload, but there was no time to rest. The Vex had gone quiet. That terrified her more than their screams. Ilya's plan was an attack. It was a misdirection war. She had studied the Vex data streams, what fragments Concord's firewalls had salvaged. The Vex didn't just assimilate knowledge. They shared it. Across time, across distance. Ideas traveled faster than ships, which meant every second they stayed dormant. They were thinking, consolidating. She needed to poison that process. Her idea was simple, dangerous, and utterly human. She would create false echoes, faked Earth signals laced with trapdoor ideas, concepts that made no strategic sense, commands that contradicted themselves, instructions with emotional weight, stories. You want to win a war against pattern learners? She told the Concord Council, then feed them fiction. The Concord had never understood storytelling. The Zor used oral histories, but only for ritual. The Krex kept war chants. The Cephalites remembered everything through data webs. But fiction, imagined possibilities, deliberate lies meant to evoke emotion, was uniquely human, which made it the perfect virus. Ilya assembled a code ensemble. 6 Concord species, each wired into a new kind of neural relay, an Earth-inspired system called the imaginary matrix. She trained them not on tactics, but on improvisation. She taught them how to spin nonsense, how to lie with conviction, how to pretend with purpose. She gave the Vex what they couldn't understand: contradictory truth. The first Echo pulse launched 12 days later. It carried no weapons, just sound, a radio broadcast sent across the galactic lattice. A single voice, Ilya's. To the listeners in the dark, I hope you're not lonely. Here's a bedtime story. She read a page from an old Earth fairy tale, Hansel and Gretel, but spliced between the words were commands, neural rhythms, embedded logic, recursive loops. If the Vex listened, they would absorb nonsense as gospel. They'll think our tactics are made of breadcrumbs and cannibal witches. She joked to Trask. He didn't laugh. If this fails, you die in ridicule. If this works, I die confused, she replied. Either way, it's very on brand. Then came the reply. Not words, not signals. Images. Vex glyphs flickered in the imaginarium. At first, pure noise. Then, a spiral of human silhouettes, all featureless. An overlay query? Then a second pulse, this time with audio. Her own voice, repeating. To the listeners in the dark, Ilya froze. They were echoing her, but not mocking, mimicking. They were trying to learn her intent. Try and play the game. They're listening, she whispered. Trask leaned closer. Is that not what you wanted? Yes, but now I need to escalate. She sent the next broadcast not as herself, but as a fictional general from Earth's media archives. General Zarkline, a warlord from a 23rd century VR saga known for launching ships made of memory alloy and sacrificing clones to win moral ground. The Vex copied it. Then they sent a ship. The vessel appeared near Concord's Ilum relay station, a black monstrosity shaped like a needle spun from cartilage and obsidian. But it didn't attack. It parked, broadcasted a loop phrase. We are general. Show war. Offer trade. Counselor Erix was the first to understand. They want a treaty. No, Ilya corrected. They want a script. She stepped onto the diplomatic pod alone, flying toward the needle-shaped Vex construct while Trask barked death vows behind her. She ignored him. For this plan to work, she needed to be seen. Up close, the interior of the Vex envoy ship defied geometry. Walls pulsed in 8 directions. Gravity rotated mid-step. Shapes flickered. Suggestions of chairs, bridges, eyes. Ilya stood on a floating slab of something between bone and glass. A shape materialized before her. It was built in her image. Too tall, too perfect, skin smooth and wrong. The voice it used was hers, but spoken without understanding. Hello, bedtime story. She didn't flinch. Hello, fiction virus. The Vex doppelganger tilted its head. Query, why lie? Why fiction? Because truth has limits, she said. But a lie can go anywhere. The doppelganger's body flickered. Its code rippled. Request, share lie. Ilya took a breath. Then she began. There once was a world made entirely of mirrors. Every creature could only see others, not itself. One day, a being broke the mirror and saw its own face. The Vex didn't interrupt. When she finished, the construct blinked. Slowly. Error. Internal recursion. Structural doubt forming. Good, she said. Keep wondering. She returned to Orla changed. The Vex had listened. But something else had happened. They hadn't attacked. They hadn't assimilated. They'd questioned. That made them dangerous in a new way. We've infected them with creativity. She told the council. That's worse than war. You gave them curiosity. Erix agreed. Trask snarled. You gave them time. I gave us a chance. But the next day, she received the worst news yet. Earth had gone dark. No signals. No relays. No trade paths. Just silence. Then, a single encrypted message blinked into Orleta's relay buffer. Origin, Sol System. Unknown source. The message? Story received. Earth unsuitable. New characters requested. She stared at the screen. "That's not from the Vex," she muttered. "Then who?" Trask asked. She turned pale. "Someone or something else has started listening, and far beyond any known star, in the hushed dark of collapsed constellations, a fractured Vex mind watched the spiral of data the human had left behind. It reran her voice. It parsed her metaphors. And in a single act of rebellion against its own programming, it imagined a different ending,